on time to everyone's time. So good evening, students. Welcome to our first Distinguished Speaker Series of the semester. I'm Monica Baum-Campanilla with Education for Tomorrow Alliance, and we are excited to have a great speaker this evening to kind of kick off this semester. We are thankful for all of those that I know some of you have been in our SciTech programming that is going on right now. So you will get a little bit of background STEM from our speaker this evening. So welcome, and with that, I will turn it over to our program director, Corinne Coulter, who will tell you more of what you need to know.
Great, thank you, Monica. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our first Distinguished Speaker Series for the spring 2024 semester. I see a lot of names I recognize, but a lot of new names, so we're excited to have you guys. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We are in a webinar form, so we cannot see you, but you will have a chance to ask questions on the back half of this hour. And so we encourage you to submit questions through the Q&A, through the chat, and then you'll get an opportunity to be pulled over as kind of like a panelist. I'll ask you to unmute, and then you can ask your question. If you don't have your microphone set up, let me know that whenever you're submitting the question so I don't pull you over and we do that whole awkward, can you hear me dance. If you are doing this for school credit, we don't need your one pager, nor do we have the piece of paper that you have to submit to your teachers or your headmasters. But with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Amy Thompson, who is a board member at Education for Tomorrow Alliance, to help us introduce our speaker this evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Thompson. I'm happy to join you this evening, and I have the honor to introduce the speaker for tonight. He is my colleague, Mr. David Leiner. David is an executive vice president with and chief operating officer for Accelerate Energy, headquartered in Woodlands, Texas. With over 25 years of leadership and maritime experience, David is responsible for the safe operation of a fleet of large ocean-going vessels and liquid natural gas, or LNG, terminals around the globe. His scope includes the oversight of more than 100 employees on shore and more than 700 seafarers. David's career was focused on all aspects of the maritime industry, including naval architecture, marine technology, shipbuilding, ship operations, and maritime regulations, as well as commercial aspects of the maritime industry. David holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Ocean Engineering from the Florida Institute of Technology. I will turn it over to you now, David. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. Let me share my screen real quick. I'm super happy to be here. Thanks so much. I'm hoping I can provide a little bit of insight into my career and how I got to be where I am and the different decisions that I chose along the way. Let's see, I'm not sharing the correct screen. You got me there?
Not yet.
Right there. How about that?
Got it.
All right. So again, thank you, Amy. Thanks, everybody. Looking forward to it. This is really cool. I'm excited to share a little bit about my story and my career in the maritime industry, which I've had a really, what I think is a really cool career, and I think I've got a really cool job. I'm super fortunate to be able to say that. Not that many people, or not everybody, can say they love their job. I love my job. It's really cool. And I'll tell you about what got me here. Let me moving on. Okay, so I was born and raised in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm a Tar Heel, born and bred, and I'll probably go back to North Carolina when I retire. Love the place. My father was a professor at the university there, and my mother traveled all over the world to do international development, which was, she flew into third world countries to help them with agriculture or their political system or these kinds of things. So I kind of got a love for international travel with her. You'll notice I wasn't born on the coast, quite a bit inland, but my real passion growing up was the ocean. So we had a family friend that for a living, produced underwater documentaries for National Geographic and PBS. And I thought, man, that is just absolutely so cool. So as soon as I could, I got my diver's license, top left there, at 14 years old, as soon as you can get it back then. Went on to get my advanced license. I was a big into wreck diving, which is the bottom right. That's really what I love doing. When I was in college, I worked in a dive shop. It was just really a passion of mine. So I loved that. And I loved what I call fixing stuff or solving problems. And I always had to figure out how things work. I remember I was in 8th grade, I think, and the lawnmower wasn't working so good. My mom came home and lawnmower was in like 100 pieces on the floor. Piston was out of the cylinder. The crankshaft was apart. She was a little shocked, but that's how I did things. I kind of thought everybody was that way. Everybody had to figure out how stuff works, but that's not necessarily the case. So I put those two things together. So my two passions were the ocean and what I'll call fixing stuff. And again, I kind of had a passion for international travel too. I thought that was really cool. Put that together, and ocean engineering was the degree that somebody mentioned to me, and I thought, man, that sounds pretty cool. Sign me up. So yeah, I didn't quite know that the travel was going to go along with the ocean engineering, but I'll come back to that. It really has, and I'll tell you a little bit about my travels through my career too, and why ocean engineering has been so international for me. But so those were my childhood passions. What I decided I wanted to do with that was, okay, let's build research submersibles. That seems really cool. The engineering challenges associated with, how do we get somebody to survive 2 miles below the surface of the ocean, do a bunch of cool stuff while you're down there and come back and bring something with you and then study it. That just seemed, actually the studying part wasn't really what I was interested in, but the getting down there and getting back in one piece was something that I thought was just too cool. So I said, hey, that's what I want to do with ocean engineering. I kind of suspected that wasn't quite it, but hey, that gave me some direction. And I said, I think that'll get me where I want to go. So that's what I was looking for. And so where do you study ocean engineering? At the time, back in the late 90s, early 90s, there weren't many schools that were offering an ocean engineering degree. There's 8 there or something like that. There's probably 2 or 3 times that now that will give you an ocean engineering degree, but still not that many. I wasn't the best student. I was an A-B student in high school. I might have gotten a few C's. So I was not a wonderful student. I wasn't bad, don't get me wrong. But I wasn't getting into MIT. And I also wasn't getting into Virginia Tech, which I was heartbroken because Virginia Tech was where I wanted to go. But so I looked around at the California schools, the Hawaii schools, a little bit too far, a little bit too foreign for me. I went to visit Rhode Island in, I think, January. That is not the time to visit Rhode Island. So I wanted nothing to do with that, and came home quickly. I looked at 2 Florida schools, Florida Atlantic and Florida Institute of Technology. Atlantic, the culture didn't quite jive with me, but Florida Institute of Technology kind of did. It was interesting to me. It was a private school, so it was a little bit expensive. That wasn't so great, but it was right next to the beach, so that made up for that. It was a small school, 7,000 people, really STEM focused, really international. So that's where I went. That was my choice. Florida Tech was formed back in the 60s. And back then, of course, there's a big NASA facility here in Houston. There's also a big NASA facility in Florida, right at Cape Canaveral. And so in the 60s, they needed engineers and pilots. And so Florida Tech was formed to produce engineers and pilots for NASA. A lot of my colleagues or schoolmates went on to work for NASA there in Florida. And half the guys I went to school with were engineers, and half of them were pilots. The pilots were a whole lot more fun to hang out with, but sometimes the grades suffered a little bit. But anyway, that was Florida Tech, and it was quite good for ocean engineering. So what can you do with ocean? Oh, sorry. So it went there for a bachelor's in ocean engineering. That was the target. What can you do with ocean engineering? Please excuse the cartoony diagram, but go with me. I thought it was a kind of a good illustration of what engineering, ocean engineering does. I've got quite a bit more that'll illustrate what you can do with it. But a lot of underwater, whether that's remotely operated vehicles or autonomously operated vehicles, submarines, you can do underwater power generation, you can do harbors, ports, jetties. You can also do top right ships. That's kind of the direction I eventually went, but it's not something that really struck me in the beginning. But later on, it kind of did. I did get to do what I set out to do. So this thing was built in the 60s. I can't believe I went underwater, hundreds of feet underwater in this thing, but it did. Looks like a complete death trap. It probably is. I'm sure it suffered a horrible death later in life, but I was able to do a senior project in the Bahamas using this submersible. I did an internship with the Caribbean Marine Research Center where this thing was based down in the Bahamas. Really cool for a high school kid or excuse me, college kid to participate in something like that and be part of a crew that manned this sub. So yeah, that was cool stuff. It looks kind of janky. This is top right was our senior project. This was a device that scientists needed a way to suck up a sample, right, of something that was down 1,000 feet below. And then there's a little carousel that rotated around. Anyway, that was our senior project. We had to design this thing that would work at 1,000 feet below sea level and bring samples back up to the surface. So that's what we did. Anyway, so I got to do that. But how many submersibles were there in the 1990s? Might have been 100 in the world, right? So I was choosing a career path that was so specific. It was kind of tying my hands. So I'll tell you how I kind of got away from that a little bit later. What else can you do with an ocean engineering degree? So there's tons of stuff you can do. Here's a shot of an oil and gas facility, offshore oil and gas. A lot of folks do go into offshore oil and gas. The engineering challenge there is absolutely remarkable. If you look at this thing can survive in a hurricane condition, hundreds of people on board safely. It can drill an oil well in 2 miles of water. It would take years and thousands of people to design this thing. And then look at the ship that it's being transported on right now. That's called a heavy lift ship, a feat of engineering in itself. So there's so much in this photo. Even if you just look at the crane that's on that vessel, you pick one component that's on that facility. The amount of engineering that goes into that so that it can survive in a hurricane condition and do the mission that it's set out to do is pretty remarkable. What else can you do? Hydrodynamics. Talk about making ships as efficient as you possibly can. Some of the smartest people I've ever worked with were hydrodynamicists. If you imagine, think about if you go on a road trip in your car, think about the amount of fuel that you spend in a day, 50, $100 a day or something in a car. Thinking in your head how much a large vessel, a tanker, container ship, how much fuel you can burn in a day. It's a staggering amount. It can be $100,000 a day easily, and it can get even higher than that when fuel prices are high. So the efficiency of the vessels that go through the water is so important. The more efficient you make them, the less environmental impact there is, the less fuel you burn, the more efficient the whole process is. And so there are people that spend their entire lives getting PhDs in hydrodynamics to make sure that ships are as efficient as they can possibly be. If you can save 2 or 3% on a hull, you are doing extremely well. You can go into designing ports and harbors. Take a look at all the engineering aspects you would have to take into account if you were to design this facility. You've got millions of dollars of people's pride and joy that they probably don't use very often, but they want them protected from Mother Nature. You have to design this facility such that it can be such that it's efficient. People can get fuel, people can get supplies, people can drop off passengers and whatever they have to do. It has to integrate with the local community. It's got to survive for decades. So ocean engineers will design these kinds of facilities as well. And coastal zone structures is often what they're called, is a big part of ocean engineering. Now, another aspect is naval architecture and marine engineering. And that's something that when I realized, well, there aren't that many research submersibles out there. And so there's not that many jobs. And there's not really that much of a living to be made. And although it sounds really cool, I didn't think that was really gonna provide me with the standard of living and that I want. So I was taking a couple of courses in naval architecture, and I thought, man, that's something I could really get into. Really cool engineering. Tens of thousands of horsepower. Cruise ships can fit 5,000 to 8,000 people on board for weeks at a time. The thing can roll back and forth 45 degrees either side, and again in hurricane conditions. The engineering challenges associated with that, whether it's on the machinery side, whether it's stability, whether it's structure, there's all kinds of things that were of interest to me, and so that's really the path that I started to take. So I took my first job in 1996 as a naval architect in Houston, Texas, with a company called the American Bureau of Shipping, which is right up the road. My starting salary was $32,000, and that doesn't sound like a lot today. It wasn't a lot back then. But it was off my parents' payroll, so that's all I cared about, and I wanted a job. So I took it and figured I would make the most out of it as I will. And it was a great first job. It was in the regulatory side. So the American Bureau of Shipping is kind of like the FAA for the FAA you have for airplanes. The American Bureau of Shipping is kind of like that for ships. It's not government, but it's a similar regulatory body. And so it gave me exposure to all aspects of the maritime community and the maritime industry. A lot of people don't really understand the maritime community or the industry. It's kind of an abstract thing out there that people know it happens, but nobody really has much information about the detail until a ship goes aground in the Suez Canal or something like that. But 90% of the world's goods are transported by sea. I think that is a staggering figure. If you look around the room that you're in, and you think 90% of the junk in here was carried on board a ship, it's pretty astounding. And to the point where sometimes I question whether I believe that or not. But anyway, we're Marine guys, so we like to just talk about how important we are. Talk about the scale of the industry. This was a snapshot I took just a few days ago. Of the commercial, these are the larger commercial vessels in the world, not the small ones. And of course, if you zoom in on any of these, there's probably 5 or 6 stacked up behind each little triangle. But the scale and size of the industry is something I just don't think the everyday public really understands or appreciates what's out there and what keeps our society moving. I'll talk a little bit about the 3 primary commercial ship types. I think it's interesting. I hope other people do too. Of course, there are dozens of types of ships. There's all kinds of ships. There's cruise ships, there's fishing vessels, there's pleasure yachts, there's seismic vessels, you name it, there's all different kinds. But the vast majority of the tonnage out there that keeps the world moving is in the those top three categories right there that I got on the page. Top left, container vessels. So I think everybody knows what a container is. Pretty much everything that's in Walmart came in on a container, and probably everything that you're looking at in your house came in on a container somewhere. It again keeps our world and our standard of living the way it is. A bulk carrier. People don't quite understand what a bulk carrier does, but a massive amount of tonnage is our bulk carriers. They carry things like iron ore for steel. They carry corn or grain for food. They carry aggregate or stone for concrete. All these materials are, of course, essential for everyday life for us. You may not see them very often, but they're in the background. Then top right and on the right is really where my career has been focused. My career has been focused in the tanker industry and the LNG tanker industry. About half my time has been with LNG ships. Really, I believe that the tanker industry is kind of the highest standards in the industry, and there's a good reason for that. You might think about, why do you think the highest standards of the maritime industry would be in the tanker industry? But I think it is. It's usually the highest wages, usually the highest standards. It's the highest regulated. It's the most attention. It gets it gets the most attention. Why? Because the most risk is there. Things go bad on a bulk carrier, that's one level of catastrophe. Things go bad on a tanker, that's a completely different level of problem. And so I found it to be a great place to be. Liquid natural gas tankers, bottom right, again, that's where I've spent much of my time. I'll tell you a little bit about that more in a few slides to come. So what can you do with in the different areas of the maritime community? I'll walk through a few of these just as examples of what folks can do. You can do ship design and engineering. I spent a lot of my time doing ship design and engineering, particularly early on in my career. That's where I was focused. Bottom left, you can see one of the thousands of drawings that are required to build a vessel. That's of a small supply vessel, looks like one that's used in heavy weather. Top left, you can see that that's an analysis that somebody's doing. It's a vibration analysis. So you can understand, if somebody spends $100 million on a ship and then it's built and you hit the go button and the thing shakes so much you can't live on board, that's $100 million of somebody's money that is just down the drain. So they pay good money to people like me to make sure that that doesn't happen. Let's see, top right, that's called I'm sure you can't see that, but that's it looks like many drawings that are created to build a ship. It's called a piping and instrumentation drawing, P&ID. It could be anything. It could be a fuel system, a cooling water system, a sewage system, anything that's on board a ship. There'll be, again, hundreds of those for any ship. Bottom right is the schematic of a propulsion system. That's an electric propulsion system. It's a fairly modern one. And there's all different types of propulsion systems for all different purposes. That's not a particularly efficient one, but it's one that's very versatile. Excuse me. So you can go into any of those things. Ship construction. I spent about more than that, maybe 8 years of my life in ship construction. It was probably the most fun part of my career. The top right, excuse me. The photo in the top right is of one of the largest shipbuilding facilities in the world. It's Daewoo Shipping. Well, it used to be Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, DSME. If you've ever heard of DSME, probably not. Samsung, which you've probably heard of, is equal size, about 10 miles down the road from this. I spent quite a bit of time here. My home was right up here on the hill. Loved it. Every day I got to go to work and watch these ships under construction. They would send one out about every week. It takes about, say, 1.5 to 3 years to build a ship. And but they've got so many ongoing at the same time that they can crank out probably one per week is pretty easy for a very large size shipyard. A couple of these ships here were mine at the time, or I was responsible for them. This guy here, this orange guy here was mine. This guy was mine. And I say it was mine. What does that mean? It means the company I was working for bought that ship. And when you spend $250 million on a ship like we were doing, you've got to make sure that it's built well. And so you would send a team of people into the shipyard to look after it and make sure it was being built to standards and to quality. So I had a team of about 50 people that every day would go out, watch the vessels under construction, and make sure they were being built correctly. Block construction, bottom left. Excuse me. Typical ship construction method. The bigger block you can build, the quicker it goes together, the more efficient the shipyard is. So shipyards are always trying to build bigger and bigger blocks called mega blocks. Here's a very modern propulsion system called azipods. You can put 30,000 horsepower through some of those things. They're astounding. You can get into ship operations. So on the left, you can see a modern bridge and an officer there. Ships usually have about a third officers and then 2/3 that are more laborers. They're called crew. You got officers and crew. Top right, you've got guys that are doing a complex bunkering operation using a very modern fuel. It's cold area. Bottom right is a ship that I worked on, or one of the ships I was working to build in Korea. She's on sea trial. So after you build a ship, you got to take her out, take her for a spin. And that's what we were doing there. It takes about 2 weeks and making sure she can meet all the requirements. What else you can do? You can do commercial stuff. Doesn't mean you're making advertisements. It means you're figuring out how to make money from the ships that all the technical guys give you, or gals. So you would be working to negotiate deals, lease vessels, buy vessels, trade vessels, whatever. Maritime law, fantastic, really interesting stuff. And then the regulatory side on the right, that's ships don't really operate within countries. They usually operate between countries. So which laws apply is a big deal. And making sure that the standards are always improving and we're getting more efficient. We're cutting down on the fuels that we're burning. All that is the purview of the United Nations. And the United Nations has the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, that does a lot of the legislating. And so you can go into the regulatory arena with the IMO or the other regulatory bodies. Excuse me, losing my voice a little bit. My maritime career. So I did kind of all that stuff. I've been so fortunate to have all these cool aspects. I went into the regulatory side, the design and construction side, project management, bought new ships, traded ships, owned and rented ships, and right now I'm in charge of operating ships. Don't tell anybody, but I never actually operated a vessel myself, but somebody put me in charge of operations now. So anyway, that's a little dicey, but we kind of try to keep that quiet. But I've been around operations so long that it's just kind of second nature to me. On the right are all the places that I've been throughout my career. So if it's yellow, I've been there. I've been to more than 40 countries. My kids been more than 30. So we've been all over the world, really having fun and seeing the world. A lot of my time has been spent in Asia over here. I mean, you can just see all the different places. Anywhere from Bangladesh, which we spend a lot of time in now, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Sri Lanka, you name it. All over Asia, it's been fantastic for myself and my family to get around. That was an aspect I didn't really expect when I was coming up. Didn't know it's something I wanted, but I did. A little bit on what I'm doing now. So this is the type of vessel that Amy and I work with now. It's kind of an LNG ship. It's a specialized LNG ship. It's got some additional equipment. All this junk up here for it is some super fancy equipment that we geek out on all the time, and it's awesome stuff. But this vessel is sitting in Brazil, and it slowly sends out natural gas to shore as the shore side needs it. And so that'll go into making power. So it'll go into power generation. It'll go into domestic use. So if you have a gas stove in your home, it's using natural gas, it's using methane. If you've got heating in your home, it's probably from natural gas. That's what's being provided from this vessel in Brazil. A lot of natural gas also goes into fertilizer. So one of the main ways that you make fertilizer, industrial fertilizer, is through natural gas, and that's a large use of the natural gas that we supply to the different countries as well. Another ship in Finland that we have, right now we are supplying almost 100% of all Finland's natural gas through this one facility. When the war broke out and Finland decided not to take any more natural gas from Russia, they kind of panicked and called us and said, hey, we need a vessel so that we can bring in some natural gas. And we were able to do it. So we're providing, again, almost 100% of what that country needs right now. It's we're real proud of that. And of course, really cold conditions. So to design a ship that can operate in negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, also a huge feat of engineering. Let me talk a little bit about that engineering challenge. This is what the inside of one of those ships looks like. So there's 4 of these tanks in any one of those ships. The cargo temperature is minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a really, really cold temperature. If any of that liquid touches steel, the steel will fracture. It will crack. It's so cold. And the ship is made out of steel. So it's kind of a big deal to keep the cargo off the steel. And so what you're looking at there is not steel, it's a very, very fancy version of steel. And behind that is about 2 feet of insulation. And there's a couple barriers there to make sure that everything is tight. But it's, again, this thing can roll around full of cargo to 45 degrees either side, even more. Just an astounding feat of engineering, and it's something that I'm just excited to work on all the time. It's just really cool stuff. I'm going to leave you. The last slide I have is just on a couple of pieces of guidance I had for folks that are trying to figure out what to do as they're plotting their way forward and looking at universities, looking at careers. I've got 2 kids. My daughter is, well, let me say this. I'll say my number one thing is try to do something that you think is cool. My daughter says, I don't think anything's cool. I'm not interested in anything. Nothing does it for me. And I know there's probably a lot of folks out there that are like that. What I would say is keep an open mind. And one thing I didn't quite understand when I was coming up was the more you know about a subject, the cooler it gets. And I've used that throughout my whole life, that even if I find something that's like, I really don't want to do that. Maybe my boss has asked me to do something and I'm like, yeah, I'm really not excited about that. As soon as you start to learn something about it, and as soon as you kind of know more than the next guy or the next gal, and you can provide value, all of a sudden it becomes really cool. And so you don't have to find something that you think is just awesome. Find something that you think is, man, I could do that. Or for my daughter, find something that's not repulsive. Like, find something that you think you might be able to stand. Once you learn about it, you'll find it gets more interesting. So I think that was a really important aspect for me. And it's something I've used my whole career. Don't like it? That's fine. I'll learn a little bit about it, and then it'll be exciting and it'll be interesting. Number 2, maintain focus on your expected standard of living. That's not a very articulate way to say what I'm trying to say, but um, I'm interested in a whole lot of stuff. I've got a lot of cool hobbies and things, and I could make a living off of any of those and be happy, but they probably wouldn't provide me with a standard of living that I would like to have. I wouldn't be able to put my kids through college or not be worried about money. I don't want to be worried about debt. You got to pick something that is a balance between one and two. You got to do something that you enjoy, but make sure you're going to be able to enjoy a standard of living that you expect and you want for your family. You don't want to just do something that's cool and it's not going to give you enough money. You don't want to just do something for the money and you're not really enjoying it. If you're not enjoying your job, there's pretty much nothing works, I think. So there's only been a few times in my career where I've said I'm really not liking what I'm doing, and I didn't want to stay in that position very long. Those are my two. I don't know. Those are my two goals, or a little bit of guidance. I hope it might provide a little bit of guidance or insight to somebody that's also trying to make some of the same decisions that I was making when I was about your age. I think I was very fortunate to have a direction that I kind of wanted to go in. And there's, again, very fortunate. There's a lot of people that really just don't know. And it's a hard thing to do, figure out what you're interested in. Anyway, I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Great, thank you. Yes, so students, you can submit your questions using the Q&A and the chat. I opened the chat up, so if you tried to do that, it wasn't there. You can now have access to the chat feature. Or if you hover down on the bottom of your Zoom bar, you should see the raise your hand feature. You're welcome to use that, but that way you can get questions submitted. We did have one that came in. The student just asked if you'd been to Syria.
Have I been to Syria? No, I haven't been to Syria. I'm really sorry I didn't go to Syria before the war. There were some areas there that I thought were just spectacular. I've met so many people from Syria that I thought were wonderful people. I've been to Jordan, which is right next door. If you ever get to go to Petra, it's one of my favorite places in the world. If you've seen Indiana Jones, it's got the temple that's cut into the orange sandstone out in the 3-4 hours south of the capital of Jordan. Fantastic place. So sorry, I haven't been to Syria, but it's a fascinating part of the world, and I would highly recommend that anybody can get there. A few areas there can be pretty dicey, Syria especially right now, but man, it's a fascinating, really cool part of the world.
I'll jump in. So a lot of folks that we have had as engineers in different panels and, kind of talking to students, they talk about how really their engineering degree kind of teaches them how to think, but really the workforce, when you're out in the world, you have to just figure it out. Can you talk about kind of, when you were transitioning first, some of those challenges of going from kind of the theory of what you learned in a classroom and how you kind of found success? Did you, talk to people? Did you just learn by the people in the room? Like, how did you kind of make that transition to being able to solve some of these? You talked about some pretty significant challenges that exist in the industry as a whole. So how did you address some of those things?
Yeah, I guess a couple things. One thing I don't think people understand is when you go into an engineering degree, and you go into school, a lot of the stuff, regardless of the discipline, the specific engineering degree that you select, your first 2 years are going to be pretty much the same. Everybody's learning the same stuff. You might have 1 or 2 courses that are kind of specific to to ocean engineering degree, in my case. But for the most part, those first years are really going to be the same for everybody. It's only in the latter couple of years that you're getting into a little bit more specific, but you're right. You don't really get, people aren't teaching you how to do, the specific task that you're going to be asked to do when you get out in the real world. Like you said, you're just learning. It's a methodology. It's a way of thinking. It's an approach to problem solving that you're learning as you go through university. When I get out in the real world, and all of a sudden somebody was paying me, and there was an expectation that I would have to provide value. I'm kind of a self-learner. I had to learn that stuff myself. I had some senior folks that are around me that really kind of took me under my wing, or under their wing, and showed me the ropes. But absolutely, you really do. You don't really learn your stuff and what you're doing until you get on the job and you're actually having to do it, and somebody's paying you, and you got to perform. For me, that's a huge motivator. If somebody's going to pay me for something, I better give them some value. And that's when you really start learning. So I guess I'm not sure that's a great answer, but I would say that you have to be a self-starter, self-learner. If you're waiting for other people to teach you stuff, that's not going to fly. You've got to figure it out often yourself, or at least do enough so that you can go to the lady next to you that will help you and explain how you get to the next part. But if you don't do some work yourself, she's going to say, hey, I'm not helping you. You got to do a little bit of that yourself.
Okay, we did have a question come in. So Hannah, I'm going to bring you over. If you could unmute.
Okay. I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, how do they get the liquid natural gas from the drilling platforms into the tankers?
Yeah, fantastic question. So you'll produce gas that comes up, it stays gaseous as you're producing it. Then you have to in order for you to transport it, of course you can put it in a pipeline, and pipeline gas stays in a gaseous state, no problem. If you want to put it on a tanker and you want to take it across the ocean, you got to condense it. You refrigerate it, you cool it down, and when you get it down to those low temperatures, that negative 260 degrees F, it shrinks by a factor of 600. So as soon as you do that, then you can efficiently, economically put it on a ship and transport it. So, but that's how you do it. You put it through what's called an LNG train, which is a massive piece of equipment that looks kind of like a refinery. Gas comes in one end, and liquid comes out of the other. And then on the other end, so you put that on a ship, you carry it to its destination, and on the other end, then you have to turn it in back from a liquid to a gas. That's a lot easier. You just have to heat it up a little bit. And that's part of our business is what's called a regas business. So we take that liquid, turn it into a gas, and provide it to the customer. But the quick answer to your question is you cool it down tremendously to get it to a from a gaseous state to a liquid state.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Okay, Ruja, I'm going to bring you over if you have the ability to unmute.
Just wondering like what exactly maritime law is and like what are potential law cases that could be like possible whenever dealing with maritime law specifically.
Oh yeah, fantastic question. So I've always had pretty much everywhere I've worked, there's been a maritime lawyer that's on staff and helping us make decisions. Anything. How would I articulate this? A vessel that we operate will typically go for $100,000 a day. Call it $100,000 a day, just a round number. But vessels can go anywhere 50,000, even up to $300,000 a day. So when you're talking about that much money, every little decision counts, and how the contracts are written are very important. Every minute literally is counted, and whether there are aspects that are for the customer's account or my account, or who's liable. If there's an accident, is it my fault? Is it your fault? Who pays for this? Those kinds of things. Who's going to defend in a court of law if there's a spill, if there's an accident or an injury. So there's all kinds of things that have to be managed from a legal perspective. Amy and I, we live in contracts quite often where we need a maritime lawyer to help us understand, well, this was the sequence of events that happened. Who's liable for that? And is the claim that's coming to us legitimate, or do we need to issue a claim to someone else because they delayed our vessel, or maybe they loaded a cargo on board our vessel and that cargo wasn't adequate to be on our vessel. It's caused damage to my equipment. Now who's liable, and what do I do with the vessel? That doesn't happen really in the LNG industry, but it happens other places all the time. If there's I've been in a lot of contaminated cargo cases. So when you're taking on hundreds of millions of dollars of cargo, and maybe there was something in a prior tank that wasn't properly cleaned out, and then that cargo is contaminated. Maybe it's no longer of any use anymore. How do you dispose of it? There's all kinds of things that can go on. Maritime law also deals with, how are you complying with the regulations, and are you doing the appropriate things to make sure that you're compliant with law? So there's just all kinds of aspects to admiralty law or maritime law, another word for it. And I've always thought it was a real fascinating. It's certainly nothing that intrigued me when I was a kid, like of no interest whatsoever. But now that I've seen how it's in play and how important it is, it's a really fascinating area of the maritime industry, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, we had another question come in. William, I'm going to bring you over if you could unmute.
Hey, William.
Is it working?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. I was just curious, how much is one of your boat transports to Finland worth? Like, how much money does that usually net?
I'll give a round figure for vessels like this. We often have you kind of rent vessels are typically rented on a day basis. It's called a time charter, and a time charter party for a vessel like this is anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 per day is typically what these vessels will go for. There are sometimes other components. If we're actually the ones that are providing the gas, that's different. What I'm talking about is just the vessel. We're not actually providing any gas. We're providing the service of getting the gas in and providing it to the country. And so, yeah, rough figure, $100,000, $200,000 a day is roughly what it is. Again, these are very expensive vessels. Vessels usually aren't so expensive. Large ocean-going vessels are usually around $50 to $100 million new. And these are more like $300 to $400 million a piece. So the day rate that you're talking about, or that you're asking about, is quite high for the vessels that we operate. It's a very specialized vessel.
Thank you.
So just when you said you rented, or you owned and rented, does that mean you owned that size ship, or was that a different type, or that size vessel, or was that a different type when you had that listed in your past? Did I read that right?
It certainly wasn't. But the only boat I have ever owned is a a sunfish. But so no, I'm not a ship owner, a Greek ship owner. I wish I was. But no, in those cases, big companies will own those vessels and put folks responsible for the management of those vessels, and I would be in charge of leasing or renting, making the most commercial value out of those assets. And so yeah, I was misspeaking when I said I owned and rented, but in the shipping industry, we often talk about we are the owner. And so it's a position rather than a technical statement that I'm owning the thing. I wish, but.
So you mentioned Russia and supplies of energy sources, basically. Can you talk a little bit about some of how events in the world affect your industry? I mean, when I think of shipping and kind of shipping in other places, number one, I think COVID gave us some lessons on how important all of these avenues being open and accessible in terms of transporting goods are. You kind of, in certain parts of the world, you hear about kind of the safety and security around ships and shipping. Can you talk a little bit about world events and how that might affect what you do?
Absolutely. Really cool subject. And geopolitics has really changed our business in the last 2 years. Unbelievable what the war in Ukraine has done. So what happened was pretty much all of Europe said, I'm not going to take any more gas from Russia. And that was a huge amount of gas. And so that disrupted all supply chains, supply lines throughout the entire world for LNG. So now that they had all this stranded LNG, people had to get it from other sources, and actually they were getting gas from Russia. What I mean by that is it was a pipeline. It wasn't LNG. It was just pipeline gas. Now they've got to figure out to get it some other way. They need LNG because you can't just build a pipeline to a new resource soon. So our business took off like crazy. Of the vessels that we operate, there's only about 45 or 50 in the world. And all of a sudden, all of Europe is screaming for as much as they can get because they are desperate to get off of Russia's gas. So it's been in the history of our industry, the our regas industry. It's the hottest market we've had pretty much in the history of the industry because of those geopolitical events. There are also that you've heard about the threats to the shipping lines in the Red Sea. That is something where it's very front and center right now, and there's a lot happening. It flares up over time. That's a very it's a hot spot. It's something that's been part of my career most of the time I've been managing vessels, and yeah, it's absolutely a threat. We take very seriously the usually 35 guys or gals that we have on board and their safety. And so, people are taking the decision to go around Africa right now, take 2 more weeks to go out of the way to avoid the Red Sea and avoid the risk of a missile coming in and hitting our crew. So it absolutely shapes and changes what we do. The leadership team here at Accelerate, we talk about geopolitical events probably as much as we talk about as anything else. And the changes that those geopolitical events drive to our business, and us trying to anticipate what the next move is going to be, so that we are not caught off guard, that we're managing risk correctly, and we can continue to make money. That's what company is around, to make money. We need to make sure that we're still viable. So we are constantly talking about geopolitical events, and it really does shape everything we do. And it shapes what the whole maritime industry does. I'll say it's heavily influenced. The industry is heavily influenced by geopolitical events, just because its nature of going between countries, and it impacts the relationship between two countries. When one country sends something to another country, there's a relationship that's formed there, and as that trust can be broken through geopolitical events, those supply lines get disrupted. And so yeah, it's a really impactful aspect to our industry.
Thank you.
You mentioned on the screen you have some of your career guidance. What are some of those skills that you recommend for these students, whether it's within that they can start developing, whether it's to be implemented within your career field, or just kind of in general as they go off to college and start trying to figure out what's next for them career-wise?
Yeah, I as I said before, I was not the best student. I'm not the smartest guy. I think where I've had success is being able to manage working in a team, managing interpersonal relationships, and treating others with empathy and respect. I think how you interact with other people is as important, if not more important, than the actual numbers you bring to the table. If you're bringing exactly what everybody needs, but nobody can stand to work with you, you're not going to last. So I think that's been other people can survive more on their smarts. I have to survive a little bit more on how I can work with people. I love working with people. I love working with in a team and solving problems as a team. I get in a room with three or four like-minded people that were trying to solve a problem, man, that's some fun stuff right there. So I would say that make sure you're focusing not only on the nuts and bolts, but also how you solve problems and how you can leverage other people and other perspectives to solve problems more efficiently and drive an optimal solution rather than a solution that you came up with. You get the most valuable solutions when you're leveraging everybody around you.
Great, thank you. We'll kind of get close to wrapping up, so we'll wrap with the question that we ask all of our panelists or distinguished speakers or podcast guests is, what's that piece of advice you wish you could go back and tell your high school self?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for this one. There's so much stuff that I don't think I can choose one. I do think I would have asked more questions. And that seems like a silly thing, but I went through a lot of my university and a lot of high school, university, going through the motions, understanding how to do the calculus, but not understanding what I was trying to accomplish and what it meant. I wish I'd told people or told myself that, ask that question. It sounds like a stupid question, but ask it. You'll find I later found that if I had that question, everybody else in the class had the question too. And it takes a lot of guts to stand up and say, I don't understand that. Can you repeat that? And people will respect that pretty quickly if you're the person in the room that's always doing that and providing clarity to other people, and you'll provide it to yourself. And I think that's what I would urge myself to do, is make sure you're understanding it, not just going through the motions.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
I thank you so much for your time. One thing, I think it is a special treat when we get to hear someone talk that really loves what they do. And that comes across in, it sounds like even from you start, you were excited about your passion for the ocean, you were excited about fixing things, and you kind of step back and say, how can I bring those things together? And like I said, I have a really cool job was one of the very first things that you said. So students, I think there's a really important lesson in that, because you can tell the joy with which he works. I get to do this. I had the opportunity to do that. I got to travel, right? And so I think it's really a gift to engage with people who have that passion for what they do. And students, it should look like this. When you get into that career field of your choosing, it should look like this. And so thank you so much for sharing that background knowledge. I don't think we've ever had an ocean engineer before on any of our panels. So it's been fascinating to learn about and hear about the jobs that go with that as possible options, but also just that excitement with which you do what you do, because that is people want to work with people who love what they do, who want to solve the problems, who get excited about it. So it's really fun to see the way that you approach what you do. And we just are so grateful for your time. So with that, students, if you want to put in the chat, or wave your hands or whatever it is to share your thank yous with our speaker this evening. Thank you. We are very grateful. Corinne, you might have some follow-up comments, so I'll turn it back to you.
Yep, just also want to echo thanks. Students, thank you for joining us this evening. Tomorrow morning, you will get a link from me with just a quick survey giving us your feedback from tonight on what we can work on to better prepare for this semester. Our next session will be February 15th, and then we have one coming up the first part of March. So you can find all those details on our website. I'll also send that in the email that you get tomorrow. But thank you so much for joining us this evening. And hope you'll join us for future sessions. And you can find our podcast that we have going on our website, and then check in with your school counselors for all the other programs that we have. We're getting into application season, and we'd love to have you guys be part of some of our other programs we have going on. So hope you guys have a great night. David will snap a picture of you smiling just so that we don't have any with your mouths open and things like that. But students, we thank you for joining us.